we'll go straight into the presentation. I'm excited about this one. It's a topic that I've been passionate about for some time now, and that's strength training for football. I believe that the gym can definitely be a place that can help your performance, but also it can be a place, if it's not done well, either by the coach or the athlete, that it can hinder your performance and increase injuries or reduce your speed and power. So I think there is a right way, so to speak, for football, and there's definitely some things you want to try and avoid. So we'll focus on the things that you want to be doing, and feel free to jump in and ask any questions along the way. I'm happy to ask any questions that you have, but welcome. I'll break up the presentation into 3 different sections. So we'll focus on development. This is typically the area that I'll work with. So guys that are still developing, they're usually under the age of 25 and anywhere from the age of sort of 14 to sort of 25 years old. So still growing into their body and still at the hormonal stage in their maturation where you can be getting faster, stronger, and fitter. Jordan's come in. Welcome, Jordan. Number 2, we'll move on to progressive overload, which I think is one of the most important principles to understand, and how it changes from off-season, pre-season, and season, the different focus areas. And then the 3rd one, adaptation, so how the body responds to training loads. We'll start off with development. So I believe that from a strength point of view, it does defer to conditioning, in that we want to take into the account the training age. Usually footballers, whether they're just come into the AfL system, so 1st and 2nd year players, or those that are playing in NAB League, you've been running for some time and you've been exposed to conditioning for some time, just in the way that sort of work in the Australian culture, either playing sport or PE classes. You're generally more exposed to conditioning type work than you are in the gym. So therefore, when dealing with players, especially the 1st year boys, I'd try and work out how long they've been lifting for, and it would change. Some players that weren't in the NAB League system had never done weights or done very little, and some had been training for quite some time, up to 6 years. So their training age was quite sound, and they were quite mature with their body and understanding what to do in the gym. And even those as well that were potentially mature, or recruited as a mature recruit, or didn't do year 12 in their final draft year. They spent more time in the weights room and on their athlete development. So there's a big gap between your age. I wouldn't say that we sort of program for their maturation age. How I program for an 18-year-old very much depends on how many years you've spent lifting in the gym. More important than probably your actual age. Most cases will focus on the basics, so fundamentally focusing on how you move is the number 1, and we spend a lot of time on that. Even the guys that are drafted into the club, it's focusing on how well you squat, press, pull, twist, and then all your different planes of motion as well, so frontal plane, sagittal plane, and transverse plane. So it's really important to go through all those different types of movement patterns. Obviously, football is a 360-degree multi-plane sport, so you want to be able to pick ground balls up at high speed, so you want to have good range of motion through your hips and ankles to do that. Then you also want to be able to jump really high, off one leg, off 2 legs, land well, and then attack the next contest. So all these different types of movement patterns that they do on the field, we want to try and make sure that we're hitting the whole body and building the body up to handle those, but we're not necessarily specifically trying to mimic those movement patterns. And what I mean by that is, we're not going to attach a cable or a weight to the foot and load up your kicking style and thinking that that's going to strengthen your quad, which will then transfer into your ability to kick longer. So we don't really look at strength training as a specific, as specific as like skill training conditioning is. So we leave the skills, and then to some point we leave the conditioning for football specifics. But where we see the place for the gym is very much around building your body up to be able to handle the rigors of the game, so injury prevention, and then also give you, if your strength is you're a dynamic player, be able to strengthen those strengths, so strengthen your one wood to be able to get a competitive edge over your athletes. Welcome, Donnie. So yeah, that's an important thing to take into account when doing the movement patterns and doing your lifting in the gym. It's not necessarily trying to specifically replicate the game of football. We're just understanding the demands of the game and strengthening those muscles that we feel need to be strong from a competitive point of view, but also need to be resilient to handle the game, particularly because football is such a long competitive season. So building your body up to be able to handle the game week after week. Just trying to let Jake in. Yeah, welcome, Jake. So from a program point of view, this is just a simple pyramid to sort of prioritize strength work in the gym and gym work in the gym. So number one, we want to make sure that when we're developing an athlete's training age, so they're new to the gym, we're improving their stability, which is their ability to be able to control their own body weight. And we're increasing their ability to move in those different planes that I mentioned earlier. So movement quality and stability are really, really important. We want to make sure before we load up a movement by adding a dumbbell, a barbell, or a kettlebell, we want to make sure the movement is sound, so you're moving really well, and as well as you're stable, so you have good understanding and able to coordinate your whole body to work in that plane of motion. So yeah, we don't want to exacerbate poor movement quality by adding more weight on the bar. So that's a good thing to take into account before adding more weight. Make sure that you feel confident that movement, you've been doing it for a couple of weeks and you know that movement is at a good level. If you're not sure, obviously with the nature at the moment with COVID, we're not doing a lot of face-to-face coaching, but what you can do with TeamBuilder is upload a video. So you can take a video from your phone, upload it onto TeamBuilder and that exercise, and that will go through to your individual journal. And then I can critique that and give you some feedback on how you can be doing that better, that movement better. Or you may be doing that really well, and that way you've got confidence to be able to progress that movement. Once you've got a good sound stability and movement, we'll then focus on strength. And the reason that strength trumps power and speed in your early athletic development, by an athlete focusing on improving how much they can lift either in a single leg movement like a Bulgarian split squat or a box squat, double leg movement, think of it like your ceiling for your power and your speed. So the stronger the athlete is, the better they're able to reach their genetic potential of their speed and power. So that's why we'll focus more on your strength work and spending more repetitions in the gym revolved around improving strength, stability, and movement over speed and power. The other side of it is that speed and power is all about intensity. So if we're hitting power and speed too frequently throughout the week and your nervous system and muscles aren't recovered, and therefore you're not able to do them at above 90% of your best, then you're not going to be able to get a power and speed stimulus on the body. So less is more when it comes to power and speed, and intensity and quality is really the key. You want to make sure if you're sprinting and you want to improve your sprinting and get a real sprinting stimulus put on the body, you need to be moving upwards of 90% of your maximum velocity. If you're doing velocity-based training in the gym, which is just basically moving light things really, really fast, like a med ball chest throw, if you're just going through the motions and doing that in a circuit where you're fatigued, you're not going to be increasing your ability to fend an opponent off your maximal power on the field. So when you're focusing on improving your speed and power, you want to make sure that you're moving at high intensity, and therefore rest period is really, really important. Rest period throughout the session, but also rest between sessions. And typically you'll see, for me, I'll put the speed and power work more often than not once a week, all on one day. So you hit that that component of your training on that one day. You've got the same intent mentally on that day of moving things really fast, both on the field and in the gym, and your body has 7 days recovery between that training session, which is a good way to go about it. Sometimes in the off season, if your training age is quite sound and you're stable, you're strong, and you're moving really well, then I might increase your speed and power days to twice a week, because I feel that your body can handle it. And we're no longer focusing on so much improving your maximum strength. We've got that to a good point. We're now focusing on the pointy end of the pyramid, and therefore, for you doing an extra speed and power session, you'll get better return out of that. But for majority of you guys, early on in your athletic development, you'll be spending more time on movement, stability, and strength. And hopefully this slide helps you understand, or my explanation on why that's important. Testing. So the philosophy that I've sort of been developed through my mentors and my time at Box Hill and Hawthorn, the philosophies around testing is important, because what you measure, you generally improve. So there's definitely a place for it. And we'll use a whole heap of different technology, and I'll use some of that I can with you guys in this current format where we're doing things remotely. So something like a Nord board, you won't have exposure to unless you seek that yourself and organize that yourself. If you want to do that, feel free to reach out and we can organize a session. But we'll typically do this with the guys that have either had a hamstring strain in the past, and they'll do some form of screening every couple of weeks to see how they're going in season. And that way it's a good way to monitor their training loads. So if your maximum strength, which you can see in the blue and orange lines, row there, where you've got your 536 newtons for the left and 554 newtons for the right, this is someone doing a Nordic test. And ultimately we want to have symmetry between both legs. The research shows if you have more than 15% deficit between legs, you're at a high risk of straining a hamstring on that weaker side. But we also want to be able to have a good ability to be able to generate high newtons, which is your strength. So hamstrings that are strong in something like a Nordic, where you're lengthening the hamstrings. So the hamstrings are on stretch in this test. So long and strong hamstrings have been known and well researched to be able to handle high intensity efforts on a football field. So you're less likely to break down and get a soft tissue injury if you've got long and strong hamstrings. And they're well balanced between left and right limbs. So we'll use a Nord board to measure that. There's also a lot of other tests that we do, which are just simply moving max repetitions, like a single leg calf raise that we can do. And for some of you guys, I would have done that before. A bench adduction is another exercise for your groins, so assessing your groin strength. We can do max single leg squats to assess your single leg stability and control. So there's other things that you can do to assess how your body is, and how well balanced you are, and how well your movement and stability is on that bottom of the pyramid, that foundation that I mentioned earlier. We can assess that through testing, but also we can see that in training as well. So if I'm progressing the complexity of your exercises, then that's a sign that you're moving really well and you're now able to do a single leg squat while maybe doing a banded power off press, which is adding more core stability to the exercise. So in training, you can also assess if an athlete's progressing, and that way for testing, and we don't really feel like we need to do that every month. By looking at your team builder and the repetitions you're putting in and the weight that you're lifting on the bar, that's also feedback that you're progressing. And I'll look at that each couple of weeks just to see how you're progressing through the program. And that gives me feedback on whether you're tracking well, or maybe we need to change your program or change your lifestyle because you're not tracking as well as we would like. So you might be thinking, if you're in that early stage of training where maybe you've only just started lifting in the gym with me, or you've only been lifting for the last couple of years, what should your focus be? Hopefully after these last couple of slides and my explanations, you're focusing on quality of movement and really getting a good understanding of those basic movement patterns, and understanding that quality movement and ingraining good quality movement over years is going to put you in good stead, not just for performance, to give you competitive advantage over your opponents, but also you're less likely to get injuries. And then the other thing that we want to chip away at is your fundamental strength. How heavy can you lift with your movement patterns? So pressing movements like bench press, pulling movements like bench pull, chin-ups, dips, push-ups, your single leg exercises like a Bulgarian split squat. So how well are we doing those exercises, your single leg RDL? So we want to make sure that when we're talking about fundamental strength for a footballer, it's not just your powerlifting movements like Olympic lifting, like a clean. It's not just your back squat and your bench press. It's also how heavy are you lifting with your single leg work, and how does that compare to your weaker side? So how much symmetry do you have between limbs is really important, and that's what comes into account when we're talking about fundamental strength. So this is an exercise. So if you've been doing your training journal and reflecting on your journey so far on Prepare Like a Pro program, then this can be a good exercise for you to do. All these numbers I've come up with, so they're my coaching experience working with footballers at all different levels. And this is where I feel it's one thing that I look at from a programming point of view, just in terms of focus areas. So if there's an area that's lacking, it might be upper body, we'll put more energy into that, particularly in the off season. It might be that you're really strong in the gym, but your functionality in transferring that into more different planes of movement and single leg type work, that stability stuff I've talked about, is poor, then we'll focus more on the functional component. So this is a good exercise for you to do. So grab out your training journal if you've been doing that. If you haven't, just grab a piece of paper and a pen, and note down some areas in terms of a measure. How are you going with your lower body? Like, where do you rank? Are you a general pop because your max double leg squat is less than your body weight? Are you at a community level because it's equal body weight? So you're able to squat 80 kilos with a back squat and you weigh 80 kilos. Or you're at 120 kilos and above, so you're at a state level, or are you at an AfL level of your strength? And if you're at AfL level with your strength, but you're finding that your power and speed is lacking, that's an area that you want to focus on. You're in a perfect opportunity now, because you've got that fundamental strength, and assuming that you're moving well, for us to really attack that pointy end of the pyramid, that speed and power. So this is typically what we're working at. Once an athlete has been lifting for a few years and they get themselves to a point where their lower body and upper body is strong enough to be able to handle an AfL game, which for lower body is around 2 times your body weight, and for AfL it's usually 1.5 times your body weight for upper body, then we'll start to shift that focus more towards your speed and power. And that's the process that we want to try and go through. If you're working towards those areas, these benchmarks, then that's why we'll spend more time and energy and more reps in the gym on your strength and your movement quality. And you sort of want to trust that process, be patient, and then once you get to this point, then focus more on the speed and power. So go through every row and just rank yourself how you measure up in these different types of tests. I'll give you guys a minute to go through that. Uh, 20 seconds, guys. If you need more time, just yell out. unmute yourself and let me know. I'm happy to spend more time on this, but I think it's really important just to get a bit of an idea of where you sit. Okay. All right, so that's from a development point of view. We'll move on to progressive overload, which is a principle of strength and conditioning. And essentially, progressive overload is advancing the exercise loads to improve your physical capacity over time. So this comes into account when we're looking at your conditioning, your energy system development. You may be, your main session of the week in 2017 might have been 8K, and then in 2020 it's now 10K, and that's because your game, your running in your game has progressed in that format, so your training has replicated that. Same in the gym. You at the start of a month you might be going through a strength block with your barbell back squat, and you're doing 3 sets of 8 at 60 kilos, and after a 6-week block you're doing 3 sets of 8 at now 80 kilos. So you can progress your repetitions by doing more volume, like from 3 sets of 8, so you get 24 reps there, to 5 sets of 5 the next week, so an extra rep. Or you can progress the weight that's on the bar. But also it's important to, when like I mentioned that earlier slide with the pyramid, it's not always about progressing your repetitions and your weight, which is your work. Sometimes you want to also think progressive overload. If you've improved your movement quality, so let's say you were doing a lunge and you're just lunging halfway from your knee to the ground, and then the next week you progressed your range and now your knee is lightly kissing the ground, so you've increased the demand on the body through greater range of motion. That's also progressive overloading, because the muscle tissues, your quads, are going through greater range of motion now in that lunge. So you've progressed the load, even though the weight has stayed the same, the repetitions have stayed the same, your movement quality has progressed. So it's not always about more. Sometimes it might just be moving better, and having more stability as well is a good way to progressively overload your muscle tissues and your nervous system. But essentially, over a off-season, pre-season, season, if you've targeted an area that you feel is really important to strengthen, maybe because it's your strength and you feel like that's an area that's going to get you drafted, and you want to strengthen that, sharpen that axe, sharpen that strength, and it might be your 2K time trial, then you want to make sure that you're progressively overloading that, and that might mean less rest periods between your reps. So maybe you're doing 200 meters, and rather, a couple of weeks before you're resting 30 seconds between your 200 meter efforts, now you're hitting the same time for effort, but you're resting less. So that's one way you can progressively overload your conditioning. And that's because you want to improve your aerobic capacity for the 2K time trial. So it's important to consider, what are you trying to improve? And then therefore, what are we trying to progress in your training? If progressive overload is done well, then we'll typically see the blue line more often than not. When it's not done well, either because you've trained too hard too early and your body's broken down and not recovered enough, and that's where the red line comes in. You either get sick or injured, and if you're injured or sick, you can't train and therefore you can't get better. So we want to avoid that at all cost. Or the green line, where you're just simply not getting enough intensity, you're not working hard enough to really demand enough stress on the body to change. So you're just getting a really small amount of return because of the effort you're putting in. So we want to somewhere sit in the middle, and that comes down to a good sound program, which is obviously my role. So making sure the program suits your lifestyle, your schedule, and your body. And then the athlete's role is to make sure that the effort is there, and the attention to detail and intent, your whole body is focused on bringing your best each day. your force velocity curve. So essentially, an easy way to break this down, if we're working on your strength, then you'll be lifting heavy weights, which means you'll be moving slow. So your velocity will be down, but your force will be high because your muscle fibers are generating a high amount of force. So like that Nordic test that I talked about, that's a maximal strength test, and your muscles will recruit the maximum amount of newtons they can, and that will get a high reading of 400 newtons on the Nord board testing. But if we're doing a velocity test like, let's say a 20-meter sprint, that's a high speed activity. So the speed will be really high, the force will be down, and you'll be moving at a high meters per second. So you might be moving up to 9.5 meters per second, or over 30 k's per hour for that movement. So it's important to understand that velocity is best done on the field with sprinting and accelerating. It's very hard to replicate that in the gym. Even when you're doing things like plyometrics, you're still only moving between 3 and 5 meters per second, if you're lucky. Most of the movements will be around 1 to 2 meters per second, and those are really fast movements, like a half squat. So that's nowhere near as high velocity as something like sprinting, where you're moving at above 9 meters per second. So velocity is usually best developed on the field with your sprinting and your acceleration, and maximal strength, because you're able to overload it by putting more weight on the body using the barbell, is best developed in the gym rather than the field. So that's important to understand. And then, like I mentioned before, power will improve. It's the combination of speed and strength. So by working on both of those qualities, you'll improve your power over time. So that's why we have our speed day, and that's why we'll have a lot of focus on your strength in the gym, because over time your power will improve. So that kind of there's just reiterating what I mentioned earlier. We want to make sure we're surfing the whole wave. It's a good way of looking at it. So we're exposing, as a footballer, exposed to all these areas over a given week, and you're progressively overloading the ones that are most important to your the way you play the game. In terms of adaptation, so this is our last segment. The body improves while we're resting. That's really, really important to understand. So when you train, you're demanding the body. You're working out, so you're expelling energy. But when you're resting, that's when your body is regenerating and adapting to improve from that stress, that demand you put on the body. And obviously, if you're living a elite lifestyle, then you're going to get the utmost benefits from that session. If you're living a poor lifestyle, then that might lead to you being overloaded, because your body won't be able to handle that stress, because you're stressing it with the way that you're sleeping, you're stressing it with your way to cope with your life stresses, and you're stressing it maybe with poor nutrition habits. So we want to make sure to understand, as an athlete, you're putting a lot of stress on your body, both mentally and physically, when you're training, and that's why you can't afford to live a poor lifestyle. Like others might be able to, like general population will get away with not eating optimally, or looking after their stress, or not sleeping, because they're not stressing their body, every day, training hard. So when you're training as an athlete, you want to make sure you're living an athlete's lifestyle. Like I mentioned earlier as well, rest is a really important ingredient. It really allows higher intensity lifting. And if you want to improve your power, you need to lift at high intensity. And you want to make sure that your intent as well, which resting helps. If you're resting really short between sets, and your short rest periods, you're more than likely to go through the motions a lot more, and the intensity won't be there, which I can definitely see it over my years in coaching, particularly when you're used to doing like circle-like workouts, which you get exposed to a lot at the football club because they're practical to do in a group setting. and what those circuit training sessions do. If that's your first exposure to gym, then that's how you associate lifting and exercising in the gym to be. So everything you do is a circuit. But as you guys have found lifting on the program, we want to make sure that we're resting between repetitions and sets to ensure that you're putting a good stimulus on the body. So the way I manage your loads is Team Builder. All your repetitions and exercises that you tick off, it compiles reports for me, so I'm able to see your total repetitions that you're lifting over the week, and then we can see your progressions per movement. So like those movements I was talking about with your back squat and your bench press and those single leg movements, we can see that over time, which is a good measure of your progress. And then the screening variables, those subjective questionnaires that I get you to fill out on Mondays. So your wellness ones, which 0 is poor, so like for motivation. 0 means you're not motivated at all. You just feel like staying in bed all day. 10 means you're jumping out of your skin with heaps of energy and can't wait to train. And then with the screening questionnaire, it's the opposite. 10 means pain, so 10 is bad. So like for the single leg hop, 10 would be excruciating pain, and 0 is pain-free. Your function is completely normal. So that by doing that, I'm able to see how your body's progressing and also individually manage and change your exercises. And if I see something unusual, I'll usually follow up with you. But it's not just a one-off thing. You know, like if your motivation is down once a week, but it's back up the following week, then that's completely normal, because when you're following a training program, it's mentally really hard. And it's very different to exercise. So I expect your motivation levels at times to drop off. And that's where you build resilience over time to be able to grit your teeth and keep working and work through those patches, and then understand over time your motivation will come back. But if your motivation is down for weeks on end, then that's something we definitely want to change, because that's a trend now and something that we want to try and go about differently. And that's the same for sleep, coping, and any of those sort of measurements. It's usually a one-off thing isn't a problem, but if it's a few weeks in a row where you're having a trend in that space, then we want to make a change. We'll have some days in there that are focused on activation, and what we're meaning by this is just promoting blood flow. So we're in a recovery mode because you probably had a big session the day before, or maybe the day before that. So it's all about focusing on that movement stability component, getting repetition in, because we know the body responds well to movement, and it also helps you develop to focus on stability on these days and quality technique, because the load is down. So it's a great day to really focus on good movement quality, as well as you should feel better after these sessions. So it's all about feeling good throughout the session, and the aim that you feel better after these sessions. If you did follow these protocols and you felt actually more fatigued after an activation session, definitely let me know, because that's a sign that your body's probably chronically fatigued, and we want to try and make sure that we address that pretty quickly to prevent yourself from getting injured or burning out. But whenever you see activation or feel good session, it's all about recovery. And yeah, if you don't feel better after these sessions, then definitely address it and let me know. Like I mentioned earlier, we've got strength, which is your maximal ability to be able to lift heavy weight. So max force development, definitely best developed in the gym. Then you've got your functional strength, which is transferring that strength in the gym onto the field. So things like wrestling, you might do this in craft work at your club, where you do the key position players play on the other key positions, and you practice leading and jostling and trying to fight for dominant position. Inside mids we'll practice it. So being able to use your hips and your arms to be able to create space. So it's really important that you develop your strength in the gym, but also you transfer it onto the field. So practice that strength on the field in your training. There's no good being really strong in the gym, but it not transferring to the field. So that's where your wrestling stuff can come into play, and also just practicing it and having that intent when you're in a contested position in skills. Like I mentioned before, power will develop as your strength gets better over years. So your ability to develop force very quickly is power. And one way we'll focus on that is with your sprint work, so your velocity-based training, as well as faster, lighter work, either using it in jumps, throws in the gym, and using bands to be able to create resistance, but you're exploding out of the bands. Intent is probably the most important thing when you try and develop your power. So if you're throwing a ball, make sure you're throwing it as fast as you can, as far as you can. So have that intent with every rep. Don't go through the motions. They're garbage reps. So make sure you give yourself plenty of rest, you reset your intent, and you make every rep count. That's the real key when it comes to developing your explosive power. And the other component of your training and an area that we want to adapt over time is injury prevention as well as performance. They sort of go hand in hand. So obviously, if you're preventing injuries, you're reducing the risk of injury, you're going to increase your performance because you're training more, both in the gym, on the field, in your conditioning, as well as in skills. So that's going to help your preparation and your performance. And we want to make sure that we're applying the principle of progressive overload, like I mentioned. So you'll have some weeks where you're lifting more and progressing, and then you'll have other weeks where you're deloading and letting the body recover. From a functional point of view, it's important that you have frontal plane movements, which is where you're basically moving side to side, like a lateral squat or an agility movement. Transverse, which is like a powerlifting type movements where we're moving up and down, which is like a squat or a deadlift, or either jumping like a box jump. And then you've got your sagittal plane stuff, which is all our twisting motions that we do, like a wood chop, and any sort of motions where we're twisting from the ankle and the hips and pivoting. So it might be like a shuttle on the field doing a suicide efforts. And then the last component that we sort of do from not only from injury prevention, but also to as you're developing and starting to play senior footy, is developing your body armor to be able to handle the contact elements of football. So typically I try and put on mass around your lats to protect your ribs, around your traps and shoulders to protect your head, to prevent from concussion and whiplash type injuries. And then we want it around your glutes and your quads and your hammies, because that's the center. So that helps that core strength to be able to fend off. Where we don't want too much muscle because it affects your function and your athletic ability is on your arms as well as your calves. We want to try and keep those quite light and lean so you can generate speed with those movements and it's not weighing you down. So where we want weight and where we want to progress your weight when you're putting on weight is around the middle, just like if you put on a weight vest, if you've ever worn a weight vest, that's where we want to put on the weight. That's going to protect all your internal organs as well as your head from all the hits. But the exterior limbs, like around the ankle area and your wrists, we don't want to add too much weight because it can potentially slow down your running function. Thanks for listening, guys. Hopefully you got something out of this presentation. This is just a quick summary. Strength development, it does take time, so be patient. Everyone develops at different stages as well, due to their genetics, but the key thing that always stands true is that for those that stick at it and be patient and are consistent over the years, you'll definitely get return out of putting work into your strength. Load management, understand that more work isn't always better. Some days you need to have those activation feel-good days to recover, and to truly adapt at your best. You need to train and train hard, but then also eat well, relax, sleep, and then repeat that process. So thank you, guys. We'll open up to